So it's actually a very grey, boring September day. And I thought to myself, why not read some Christmas stories for Christmas to cheer myself up? Um, this is a particularly weird story from out of one of the little anthologies that I have. And I had read this story as a kid. A decade later, my friend Andrew mentioned that he wanted to make okonomiyaki, right? Which you'll hear about in the stories. And I looked at him and I said, Andrew, save the moon for Kerdy Dickus. And he looked at me with, the expression on his face that you'd assume someone would have if someone had just blurted out that to them. So I went and found this book and this story and read it to him. And we did make okonomiyaki and it was delicious. So that's why I thought this one might cheer me up today. And, merry thing, happy stuff, future times. So yeah, here we go. Save the Moon for Kerdy Dickus by Tim Wynne-Jones. This is Kai's story. It happened to her. It happened at her place in the country. I wasn't there when it happened, but I know what her place in the country looks like, and that's important. In this story, the way things look is really important. There's more than one version of this story. If Kai's younger brothers, Brad or Tony, told you the story, it would come out different. But not as different as the way the stranger tells it. We know his name now, but we still call him the stranger. Perhaps you know his version of the story. It was in the newspapers. Well, the National Enquirer anyway. Kai's father, Tan Mori, built their house in the country. It's a dome. It looks like a glass igloo, but it's actually made of a web of light metal tubing and special clear plastic. From the outside, you can see right into the house, which Kai didn't like one bit at first because it wasn't very private. But the house is at the end of a long driveway surrounded by woods, so the only things that can look at you are blue jays, raccoons, the occasional deer, and from way up high on a hot day, turkey vultures circling the sky. It wasn't a hot day when this story happened. It was 2 days before Christmas, and there was a bad freezing rain. But let me tell you more about the house, because you have to be able to see the house in order to understand what happened. You have to imagine it the way the stranger saw it. For one thing, there's all this high-tech office stuff. Kai's parents are both computer software designers, which means that just about everything they can do can be done with a computer. Word processors, video monitors, a modem, a fax machine. Oh, wow, I wonder how old this story is. 1998. It's from 1998. They've got a fax machine. They're always popping on and off. Their lights blink in the dark. You also have to know something about Kai's family if you want to see what the stranger saw when he arrived at their door. You especially have to know that they have family traditions. They make them up all the time. For instance, for the past 3 years, it's been a tradition that I go up from the city for Kai's birthday in the summer and we go horseback riding. I'm not sure if that's what tradition really means, but it's nice. It's also a tradition with Kai's family to watch the movie It's a Wonderful Life every Christmas. And so, 2 nights before Christmas, that's what they were doing. They were wearing their traditional Christmas time nightclothes. They were all in red flannel pajamas, even red slippers. Kai had her hair tied back in a red scrunchie. That's what the stranger saw, this family in red. They had just stopped the movie for a break. They were going to have okonomiyaki, which is kind of like a Japanese pizza and pancake, all mixed up together with shredded cabbage and crab meat, and this chewy wheat gluten stuff called seitan. This is a tradition too. Tan likes to cook. So they watch It's a Wonderful Life, and they have this mid-movie snack served with kimparagobo, which is spicy, and other pickly things that only Tan and Barbara, Kai's mother, bother to eat. But the kids like okonomiyaki. Tan Mori is Japanese. Here's how he looks. He wears clear-rimmed glasses. He's short and trim and has long black hair that he wears pulled tightly back in a ponytail. Kai doesn't think the stranger had ever seen a Japanese person up close before. He probably hadn't ever seen someone who looked like Barbara Mori either. She isn't Japanese. She has silvery blonde hair, but it's cut very, very short so you can see the shape of her head. She's slim and bony, and she has one of the nicest smiles you could imagine. She has 2 dark spots beside her mouth. Kai calls them beauty marks. Barbara laughs and calls them moles. It was Barbara who first noticed the stranger while Tan was cooking the okonomiyaki, and the boys were getting bowls of shrimp chips and Coke, and Kai was boiling water for green tea. The freezing rain was pouring down on the dome, but inside it was warm, and there were little islands of light. A single light on a post lit up the driveway a bit. "There's someone out there," said Barbara. "That poor man." She went to the door and called him. The kids left what they were doing to go and look. He was big and shadowy where he was standing. He was also stoop-shouldered, trying to hide his head from the icy downpour. Barbara waved at him. "Come," she called as loudly as she could. "Come." Her teeth were chattering because she was standing at an open door wearing only her pajamas, and the cold wind was pouring in. The stranger paused. He seemed uncertain. Then a gust of wind made him lose his balance, and he slipped on the ice and fell. When he got up, he made his way towards the house slowly, sliding and slipping the whole long way. He was soaked clear through all over. He only had a jean jacket on, no gloves or hat. As he approached the house, Kai could see that although he was big, he was young, a teenager. Then Barbara sent her to the bathroom for a big towel. By the time she got back with the towel, the boy was in the house, standing there dripping in the hall. Barbara wrapped the towel around his shoulders. She had to stand on her toes, he was so big. He had black hair, and he reminded Kai of a bear that she had seen at the zoo after it had been swimming. He smelled terrible. His wet clothes smelled of alcohol and cigarette smoke. The kids all stepped away from him. Tony crinkled up his nose, but Barbara didn't seem to care. "Come in and get warm," she said, leading him towards the kitchen. "Oh, I haven't told you about the kitchen yet. Well, there's kind of an island shaped like a kidney with a built-in stove and sink. Since the walls of the dome are curved, all the cupboards and drawers and stuff are built into the island. Lights recessed into the ceiling above bathe the island in a warm glow so that the maple countertop looks like a beach." Tan was already pouring the stranger some tea when Barbara brought him over and tried to sit him down near the stove where it was warmest. But he wouldn't sit. Tan handed him a tiny cup of steaming tea. The cup had no handle. The stranger didn't seem to know what to do, but the warmth alone was enough to make him take it. His hands were huge and strong and rough. The tiny cup looked like it would break if he closed his fist. He took a sip of the tea. His eyes cleared a bit. "Dad's in the truck," he said. "Oh my God," said Barbara. "Where? We should get him. Tan?" The stranger nodded his big bare head in the direction of the truck, though of course you couldn't see it from the house. Kai looked down the driveway, but there is a bend in it, so she couldn't see the road. Tan had turned off the gas under the frying pans and was heading toward the closet for his coat. "I'll bring him back," he said. "No," said the stranger. His voice cracked a little. "He's okay. He's sleeping. Truck's warm." Nobody in the Mori family knew what to do. Tony looked about ready to laugh. Kai glared at him. Tan shrugged and looked at Barbara. "It's not too cold as long as he's sheltered." She nodded, and Tan turned the stove back on. The okonomiyaki were ready to flip. He flipped them. The stranger stared at them. Maybe he thought they were the weirdest pancakes he'd ever seen. It's hard to know what he was thinking. Then he looked around. "Where am I?" he asked. "The 5th line," said Barbara, filling his cup. "The Morey house is on the 5th Division line of Leopold County." "The 5th?" he asked. He stared around again. He looked as if he didn't believe it. "The 5th?" He stared at Barbara, who nodded. He stared at Tan. Tan nodded too. The stranger kept staring at Tan in his red pajamas, his long ponytail, his bright dark eyes behind clear-rimmed glasses. "Where am I?" That's when the fax machine started beeping, and the stranger spilled his tea. Brad got him a tea towel, but he didn't seem hurt. He stared into the dark where the computer stuff is. There are hardly any walls in the dome. The fax machine beeps when a transmission is coming through. Then it makes a whirring sound, and paper starts rolling out with a message on it. Like, considering that it's now 2023, it's good that they put that explanation in there. The boy watched the fax machine blinking in the shadows, because the lights were not on in the office part of the dome. "It's just what my parents do," said little Tony. The machinery was still a mystery to him too. The stranger looked at Tan again, and all around at the dome. There's a 2nd-floor loft, but it's not big, so the stranger could see clear up to the curving roof and out at the rain pelting down. If there had been stars out, he could have seen them. He seemed to get a little dizzy from looking up. "Sit," said Barbara, and this time she made him sit on a stool next to the kitchen island. He steadied himself. To Kai, he looked like someone who had just woken up and had no idea what was going on. By now, the fax machine was spewing out a great long roll of paper that curled to the floor. The stranger watched it for a minute. "I think we should get your father," said Barbara in a very gentle voice. No," said the boy firmly. "He's asleep. We was at Bernie's. You know Bernie?" But none of the Moreys knew Bernie. "Cards," he said. Having a few drinks. Christmas." He looked back at the fax. "What is this place?" Tan laughed. He flipped 2 okonomiyaki onto a warm plate and handed them to the boy. "Here, you look like you could do with something warm to eat." "More to read?" asked the boy. He thought Tan had said, "more to read." Tan handed him the pancakes. "Try it," he said. Kai went and got the spicy sauce. She poured a bit on the pancake and sprinkled some nori, toasted seaweed, on top. The stranger looked at Kai and at the food steaming under his nose. It must have smelled funny to him. He looked around again. He was having trouble putting all this together. These strange, sweet, salty smells. These people all in red. "You never heard of Bernie?" he asked. "No," said Kai. "Bernie Nystrom? Never heard of him. Over on the..." He was going to say where it was that Bernie Nystrom lived, but he seemed to forget. "Dad's out in the car," he said. "We got lost." "Not a great night for driving," said Tan, filling the stranger's cup with more steaming tea. "Saw your light there," he said, squinting hard as if the light had just shone in his eyes. "Slid right out." He made a sliding gesture with his hand. "It's pretty icy," said Tan. "Never seen such a bright light," said the stranger. Kai remembers him saying this. It rankled her. He made it sound as if their light had been responsible for his accident. Her mother winked at her. Tony looked like he was going to say something. Brad put his hand over his brother's mouth. Tony struggled, but the stranger didn't notice. The fax stopped. You sure you ain't never heard of Bernie?" he asked one more time. It seemed to matter a great deal, as if he couldn't imagine someone not knowing good old Bernie Nystrom. "Is there someone we could phone for you?" Barbara asked. "Do you need a tow or something?" The stranger was staring at the okonomiyaki. "Anita who?" he asked. At that, both Brad and Tony started giggling until Kai shushed them up. A tow truck, said Barbara very carefully, to get you out of the ditch. The boy put the plate down without touching the food. He rubbed his hands on his wet pants. He was shivering. Barbara sent Brad to get a blanket. Could I use your phone? The boy asked. Kai ran to get the cordless phone from the office area. There was a phone closer, but Kai always uses the cordless. You have to see this phone to imagine the stranger's surprise. It's clear plastic. You can see all the electronic stuff inside it, the speakers and amplifiers and switches and everything. The stranger stared at it, held it up close to his eyes. That was when Kai thought of all the time travel books she's read, and wondered if this guy was from some other century. Then she remembered that he had come by truck. That's what he'd said. She wondered if he'd been telling the truth. He sure didn't want anyone to go look for his father. Maybe he'd been planning on robbing them? But looking at him, she realized that he was in no condition to rob anyone. She showed him how the phone worked. What's your number? She asked. Don't got no number, he said. But he took the phone and slowly punched some numbers anyway. He belched, and a sour smell came from his mouth. Kai stepped back quickly, afraid that he was going to throw up. The phone rang, and no one answered it. Kai watched the stranger's face. He seemed to fall asleep between each ring and wake up again, not knowing where he was. Neighbours, he said, hanging up after about 30 rings. He looked suspiciously at the phone, as if to say, how can I reach anyone I know on a phone like that? Then he looked at Kai and her family. Where am I really? He asked. Brad came back with a comforter, and Barbara suggested to the stranger that he could wear it while she put his wet things in the dryer. He didn't like that idea, but as nice as Barbara is, as small as she can be pretty pushy, and she was afraid he was going to catch pneumonia. So the stranger found himself without his clothes in a very strange house. Maybe it was then, to take his mind off wearing only a comforter, that he tried the okonomiyaki. He was very hungry. He wolfed down 2 helpings, then a third. It was the first time he smiled. Hey, said Kai, it's almost Christmas. You better save some room for turkey dinner. The stranger stopped eating. He stared at the food on his plate. Kai wanted to tell him she was just kidding. She couldn't believe he'd taken it so seriously. She was going to say something, but then he asked if he could phone his neighbor again. He still didn't have any luck. But now he seemed real edgy. Then the telephone answering machine in the office took a long message. It was a computer expert phoning Tan, and he talked all in computerese, even though it was nighttime and 2 days before Christmas. The stranger must have heard that voice coming from the dark side of the dome where the lights flashed. Maybe that was what threw him. Or maybe it was when the VCR, so high-tech, which had been on pause, came back on by itself. Suddenly there were voices from up in the loft. Kai can't remember what part of the movie it was when it came back on. Maybe it was when the angel jumped off the top of the bridge to save the life of the hero. Maybe it was a part like that with dramatic music and lots of shouting and splashing. Maybe the stranger didn't know it was just a movie on TV. Who knows what he thought was going on there? Maybe in his house there was no TV. He got edgier and edgier. He started pacing. Then suddenly he remembered Lloydie Rentoul. You know Lloydie? He asked. Nobody did. Sure, he said, Lloydie Rentoul. He pointed first north and then east and then north again as he tried to get his bearings in this round house with its invisible walls. You don't know Lloydie? The stranger, despite his size, suddenly looked like a little lost boy. But then he shook his head and jumped to his feet. Lloydie, he's got a tractor, he said. He'll pull the truck out. He started to leave. I'll just get him, eh? He forgot he didn't have any clothes on. Tan led him back to his stool. Barbara told him she'd check on the wash. Tan said they should maybe phone Lloydie first. But Lloydie didn't have a phone. The people Kai knows in the country all have phones and televisions. But there are people around Leopold County who have lived there longer than anyone else, and live poor, scraping out a living on the rocky soil just like their forefathers and foremothers did. Maybe the kids were looking at the stranger strangely then, because suddenly he got impatient. Kai said that he looked like a wild bear in a down comforter, cornered by a pack of little people in red pajamas. I'm going to get Lloydie, he said loudly. It sounded like a threat. It scared the Morris a bit. Barbara decided to get him his clothes, even though they were still damp. And so the stranger prepared to go. They didn't try to stop him, but they insisted that he borrow a big yellow poncho because it was still raining hard. Now that he had his clothes back on and his escape was imminent, the stranger calmed down a bit. I'll bring this back, he said. I'm sure you will, said Tan, as he helped him into the poncho. Kai went and got him a flashlight too. It was a silver pencil flashlight she had gotten for her birthday. She had to show him how it worked. I'll bring this back, he said to her. Okay, she said, thanks. And then he was gone. He slid on the driveway and ended up with a thud on his backside. He'll have awful bruises in the morning, said Barbara. She called him to come back. She told him she would call for help. He turned halfway down the driveway and seemed to listen, but his hearing wasn't very good even up close, so who knows what he thought she said. She did mention getting the police. Maybe he heard that. Whatever, he turned and ran away, slipping and sliding all the way. Tan considered driving him, but the ice was too treacherous. What are the bets, said Brad, that we never see that stuff again? They never did. The stranger never did return the poncho or the flashlight. In the morning, the family all went out to the road. There was no truck there. Somehow, in his drunken haze, the stranger must have found Lloydie Rintoul, or somebody found him, or his dad woke up and got the truck out. It was a mystery. Kai tried to find Bernie Nystrom's name in the phone book. There was no listing. The boy had never said the name of his neighbour, and they already knew that Lloydie Rintoul had no phone, so there was no way of tracking him down. The Morris didn't really care much about getting their stuff back, though. It was Christmas, after all. I saw the story in the National Enquirer in January. I was in line at the grocery store with my mother, reading the headlines of the tabloids. I enjoy doing that. There are great stories about tribes in Brazil that look like Elvis Presley, or some 75-year-old woman who gives birth to twin dolphins, or families of 8 who live in an abandoned filing cabinet. But this headline jumped off the page at me. Teen abducted by Martians. Country boy undergoes torturous experiments while constrained in alien flying saucer. Experts wonder who or what is Kerdy Dickus, and what does he want with our moon? I don't know why I flipped open to page 26 to read the story. I don't know why I paid good money to actually buy the rag. Somehow I knew. And when I showed the picture on page 26 to Kai, she gasped. It was him. There was the stranger, showing the huge bruises inflicted by the aliens on his arms and ribs and thighs. He told of how he had seen a blinding light, and the truck had been pulled right off the road by the saucer's powerful tractor beam. He told of how the aliens had hypnotized him and brought them to their saucer. He told of the drugs they had made him drink. How they had tried to get his father too, but he had stopped them. He told of the weird food they had made him eat, and how it had made him throw up all the next day. His mother could attest to his ill health. I've never seen him so green, she said, and he's normally such a healthy lad. It was his mother who had contacted the National Enquirer. She read it all the time and knew it was a story that would interest them. His father, too, although he had managed somehow to stay out of the clutches of the alien's hypnotic powers, could attest to the attack on the car. And then, blackness. There were 2 hours missing out of his recollection of the night. The aliens had obviously zapped him. "Something ought to be done about this kind of menace," said the father. According to the newspaper, the boy underwent several sessions with a psychiatric investigator after the incident. The investigator specialized in AATT, alien abduction trauma therapy. He put the boy in a deep trance and interviewed him at length. Truth drugs were administered, and all the results concurred. The boy had obviously undergone a close encounter with alien beings. Under the trance, the boy revealed some overheard conversation that might, the investigator believed, partially explain the purpose of the aliens' trip to Earth. This might be a reconnaissance mission. Other experts in the field agreed. But their long-term goal has to do with our moon and the saving of it. From what? For what? It's hard to tell. One line had become imprinted on the boy's mind. The only spoken part he recalled vividly from his close encounter. "Save the moon for Kerdy Dickus." "Perhaps," said the psychiatric investigator, "there is some alien purpose for the boy remembering this one line." The article went on to give a pretty good account of the aliens, what they looked like, what their flying saucer looked like, but you already know all that. I had heard about the stranger from Kai. That's how I somehow recognized the story in the Inquirer. The next time I saw the Mauries, I showed them all the paper. But after they had all laughed themselves silly, we talked about it a lot. Should they try to find the stranger, now that they knew his name? Even without a phone, they could easily track him down. Should the paper be contacted so that the truth could be known? What about the psychiatrist who specialized in AATT? The experts? I wouldn't mind getting my flashlight back, Kai admitted, but she wasn't really serious. And so they have never followed up on the story. Kai always imagines she'll run into the stranger one day in the nearby town. I hope I'm with her. Maybe I'll be up there for her birthday. Maybe it will be raining. Maybe we'll be coming out of a store and he'll be coming in wearing the big yellow poncho. He'll walk right by us, and Kai and I will turn just as he passes and whisper the magic words, "Save the moon for Kerdy Dickus." Then we'll hop into our saucer and slip off back into our own world.